Danielle Colby's revelation didn't come as a dramatic television special or flashy tell-all. Instead, it arrived as an honest and heartfelt confession that peeled back the curtain on years of silent tension, unspoken truths, and the painful unraveling of a once inseparable trio. Fans of American Pickers have spent countless hours speculating about the rift between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz, but now, for the first time, Danielle is offering clarity. She lived through the evolution of their friendship, experienced the highs of shared success, and bore witness to the heartbreaking lows of growing apart. This wasn't just a show to her. It was her life, and Mike and Frank were more than co-stars. They were like family. When American Pickers launched in 2010, few could have predicted the cultural phenomenon it would become. Danielle didn't ask for the spotlight. She was content behind the scenes, running the antique store in LeClaire, Iowa, and providing the logistical backbone for every pick. Her job was far from simple. She fielded endless calls, pursued leads with unwavering determination, and kept the shop running seamlessly as Mike and Frank zigzagged across the country. She played a vital role in maintaining the rhythm of the show and became the glue that kept everything together. Despite not being on the road with the guys for most of the early seasons, she quickly earned a devoted fan base for her authenticity, humor, and unmistakable style. Danielle's dynamic with Mike and Frank was rooted in years of friendship. They shared the same hometown and a common bond forged long before the cameras ever started rolling. She admired Mike's boundless energy and bold ideas. He was a visionary, always dreaming bigger, pushing harder, and chasing the next adventure. Frank, on the other hand, was a quieter presence, more introspective, meticulous, and grounded in the tangible. He loved the craftsmanship behind the antiques, the story each item told. Danielle understood both of them deeply and loved them in different ways. She was the sounding board for their frustrations and the steady hand that soothed tempers when tensions flared. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable. Mike and Frank's playful bickering and shared excitement over rare finds felt genuine because it was genuine. Off-screen, they were like brothers. But Danielle also saw the warning signs. The increasing fame and pressure of producing a hit series began to weigh heavily, particularly on Frank. He began struggling with health issues and personal demons that didn't always make their way into the public narrative. Danielle watched as Frank became more withdrawn, while Mike, ever the optimist, charged forward with bigger plans for the show and their growing business empire. The divide widened, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, until the cracks became impossible to ignore. Danielle never imagined she'd be caught in the middle. She loved them both and tried to stay neutral, but it wasn't always easy. There were moments when Frank confided in her, expressing his pain at feeling sidelined, left behind by a friend he once considered a brother. At the same time, Mike leaned on Danielle for support, needing someone who understood the weight of carrying a franchise on his shoulders. She became the emotional go-between, absorbing both of their frustrations while suppressing her own heartbreak. She wasn't just watching the breakdown of a friendship, she was living through it. As the show continued without Frank, Danielle couldn't help but feel the absence keenly. The laughter was a little quieter, the rhythm a little off. Fans noticed, too. The easy rapport that once defined American Pickers had shifted, and no amount of editing could disguise it. Behind the scenes, Danielle grappled with conflicting emotions. She missed the trio they once were, but she also knew that things could never go back to the way they had been. People change, circumstances evolve, and sometimes even the deepest bonds can fray under the strain of life's realities. Danielle's decision to speak out wasn't about taking sides. It was about honoring the truth, her truth. She doesn't vilify either Mike or Frank. Instead, she paints a picture of two men she once loved like brothers, caught in a whirlwind of fame, ambition, and personal struggle. It's a story of growth and loss, of the delicate balance between loyalty and self-preservation. And as she shares her memories, her regrets, and her hope for healing, it becomes clear that this isn't just a story about American Pickers. It's a deeply human story about friendship, fame, and the pain of watching something beautiful slowly fall apart. Danielle Colby had always believed in them, both Mike and Frank. It wasn't blind trust, but something deeper, forged over years of shared effort and unspoken understanding. They were like family, navigating the unpredictable world of antique picking together. And like any family, they had their moments. Quiet, tensions, brief silences, subtle shifts. Danielle noticed the changes long before the fans did. Frank's silences became more frequent, while Mike, always bursting with energy, started pushing harder, as if trying to hold everything together with sheer will. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just little signs. A shorter response here, an awkward pause there. But to Danielle, who had stood beside them since the beginning, they meant something. She had been there from the very start, before the lights, before the fame, before the History Channel took a chance on what seemed like a strange idea. Two men digging through barns and backyards for forgotten relics. Mike had carried the vision for years, filming with a shaky handheld camcorder, dreaming about turning rust into gold. Frank had been hesitant at first, but loyal enough to tag along. Danielle supported them from the shadows, running the shop and following up on leads, doing the groundwork while the networks dismissed the pitch as too obscure. But Mike never let go. His determination was relentless, and when History Channel finally gave them the green light in 2010, everything changed overnight. The premiere drew in over 3 million viewers, and suddenly the little antique shop in Iowa became a pilgrimage site. Fans poured in by the hundreds, snapping pictures, eager to catch a glimpse of where the magic happened. Danielle became a celebrity in her own right, recognized for her tattoos, her infectious laugh, her presence. She was stopped in grocery stores, approached by strangers asking for autographs or selfies. At first, she enjoyed it. The buzz, the validation, the joy of seeing people so invested in something they had built from the ground up. But it didn't take long before the excitement began to morph into overwhelm. The phones rang nonstop. Emails flooded in. Everyone wanted a piece of the show, and of them. Meanwhile, Mike and Frank were still out on the road, living the dream in theory but wearing down in reality. Mike would call in ecstatic over a rare neon sign he'd found, while Frank would be more subdued, proudly showing off an old fire extinguisher like it was a crown jewel. They were still in sync professionally, but Danielle could sense the growing emotional gap between them. The long filming schedule, 250 days a year, was taking a toll. They were exhausted, physically and emotionally. The camaraderie was still there, but dulled by fatigue and the sheer scale of what the show had become. Fame hit them differently. Mike embraced it. He thrived under the spotlight, opened a store in Nashville, and leaned into his role as a celebrity picker. Fans lined up to meet him, and Danielle was genuinely happy to see him succeed. He'd worked so hard for it. Frank, on the other hand, shrank from the attention. He stayed in Illinois, kept to himself, and often changed the subject when Danielle teased him about his low-key fame. He didn't want the crowds or the interviews, just the simplicity of picking and the peace of being left alone. Their contrasting personalities were part of what made the show work, but also what made the internal friction inevitable. Mike's big-picture thinking sometimes clashed with Frank's methodical, detail-focused approach. Danielle admired them both and tried to keep them balanced, but as the years passed, she found herself caught in the middle more often than not. And while she remained grounded, becoming a beloved icon in her own right with her burlesque flair and alternative style, she couldn't shake the feeling that the show was shifting into something else entirely. It wasn't just about the fines anymore. It had become a full-blown production with layers of management, sponsorships, marketing campaigns, and all the trappings of a commercial juggernaut. The innocence of the early days, the sheer love of discovery was slowly being eclipsed by the pressures of a multi-million-dollar brand. For Danielle, it was bittersweet. She was proud of how far they'd come, but part of her missed the simplicity of that first road trip, that first dusty barn, that first excited phone call from Mike. The heart of American Pickers still beat, but it didn't sound quite the same. The noise never stopped. It only intensified. By 2015, American Pickers had become a cultural phenomenon, and with that came a steep rise in stakes. The cost per episode soared to over $250,000, and that meant higher expectations, more pressure, and more stress for everyone involved. Danielle could see it wearing on Mike. He was driven, obsessed even, with making every episode stand out. He wanted every find to be television gold, something big, something memorable. But Frank? He was different. He wanted the show to remain grounded in what it was originally about: the love of the hunt, the quiet joy of discovering forgotten treasures. Danielle would sometimes hear them argue, nothing explosive, but enough to remind her that not everything was as perfect behind the scenes as it looked on camera. "We need a big one for this week," Mike would say with urgency. "I don't dig stuff up for TV," Frank would shoot back, irritated. Danielle, caught in the middle, would keep to herself, sticking to her responsibilities at the shop where she was the dependable center of it all. While the show turned into a whirlwind of fame and commercial success, she remained the one constant in a rapidly changing world. Millions tuned in weekly, and Danielle would often take a breath and marvel at what they'd built, from that humble Iowa shop to a show broadcast across the nation. But fame, she knew, always came at a price. She couldn't predict what was coming, but the air around them had changed, thick with tension and something unresolved. Backstage, things were starting to unravel. While American Pickers remained a fan favorite, the dynamic within the trio was deteriorating. Danielle wasn't even on the road, but she was still looped into everything: calls from Mike in Nashville, quiet updates from Frank when he felt like talking. The team had grown into a massive production unit, and the workload was relentless. Mike never slowed down. He'd call her, overflowing with ideas, his brain buzzing with new ventures and ways to push the brand further. She admired his drive, but she also heard the fatigue behind the enthusiasm. Frank, meanwhile, called less and less. When he did, his voice was tired, thinner than before. Danielle knew about his Crohn's disease. She also knew how hard he worked to hide the pain. He rarely spoke about it, but when she gently asked if he was okay, he'd just give her that half smile and say, "Just tired." And then he'd move on. But the crew told her he was missing shoots, that he looked sick, that he wasn't the same. At the shop, Danielle kept things afloat. Fans would still come in, cheerful and excited, asking, "Where's Frank?" She'd smile, change the subject, and avoid stirring gossip. But inside, she worried. Frank was retreating, and Mike was charging ahead at full speed. They were drifting. Once, Frank called, clearly upset over something Mike had said during a shoot. "He's turning this into a circus," he muttered angrily. Danielle didn't argue. She listened, tried to soothe him. "He's just excited," she said gently. But Frank sighed and hung up. She didn't tell Mike. It wasn't her place. She wasn't there to take sides. She just missed how it used to be when the three of them would sit, laugh, swap stories, and share a single dream. By 2019, the writing was on the wall. Frank's health was deteriorating, and his absences became more frequent. The production team scrambled to adjust schedules and keep the show on track. Mike, still pushing hard, grew visibly frustrated. Danielle could hear the strain in his voice whenever they spoke. "I wish Frank were here," he admitted once, his voice low, almost broken. Danielle had no response. What could she say? The show had become something far bigger than them all, a machine that kept moving no matter who got left behind. And then, in March 2020, everything stopped. The show didn't end, but something vital fell apart. Frank filmed his final episode, and then he disappeared. No announcement, no farewell, just silence. Mike called Danielle one evening, his voice subdued and heavy. "Frank's done," he said. "He's not coming back." Danielle froze. "Why?" she asked quietly. But Mike didn't explain. There was nothing more to say. She didn't push him, but the sorrow in his voice said enough. She had seen it coming, prepared herself for it, but when it finally happened, it still hurt. And deep down, Danielle knew this wasn't just the end of Frank's time on the show. It was the end of something much more profound. A chapter had closed, and none of them would ever be the same again. Frank had been an essential part of the American Pickers' journey. His goofy laugh, his love for the odd and overlooked, the way he lit up when finding a rusty gas pump or a vintage sign, those things had built the heart of the show. But now, the truck was moving on without him, and the absence felt like a missing heartbeat. It wasn't just a cast change, it was personal. Frank later revealed that he and Mike hadn't spoken in over 2 years. "My back was killing me, and Mike didn't even call," he said in an interview. And though Danielle had her doubts about how black and white that version was, she couldn't deny the sadness in it. Mike had shown concern at times. Danielle remembered moments when he genuinely worried, when he asked how Frank was doing. But the show's brutal schedule didn't allow for much downtime, or for delicate emotional conversations. And Frank, being who he was, never really reached out, either. Danielle knew him well enough to understand he'd never ask for help. If he needed someone, he kept it buried deep. Danielle didn't reach out much herself. That just wasn't her way. She figured if Frank wanted to talk, he would. But he didn't. And meanwhile, the internet exploded with questions. Fans speculated wildly. Did Mike push Frank out? Did Frank quit? Danielle saw it all but stayed silent. She continued to manage the store, posted throwback photos from the show, and danced carefully around the flood of fan questions. She wasn't about to pick sides. She'd been close with both of them, and the thought of choosing between them made her feel sick. She hated that Frank was gone. One day she texted Mike, "How's it going?" He replied simply, "We're doing it." She didn't ask about Frank. The message felt too clinical, too distant. The truth was complicated and painful. Frank had been through hell. His Crohn's disease flared badly. He was hospitalized 17 times in 2 years. On top of that, he got sober in 2020, and Danielle heard bits of the story through the crew. Sobriety had changed him. Life had changed him. Danielle never saw Frank as a bad guy. She understood what chronic illness, pain, and emotional turmoil could do to a person. She remembered the way he used to crack jokes, how he'd light up over a rusty bicycle frame or a pile of old oil cans. That spark was fading now, and it broke her heart. Meanwhile, Mike kept filming. New faces came into the spotlight. Danielle watched the episodes. They still had charm, still told stories, but they weren't the same. Something warm was missing. Frank's quirky energy was irreplaceable. Danielle wished she could bring him back, even just for a while. When COVID hit in 2020, everything got harder. The shop had to close and reopen in strange cycles. Danielle wore a mask, stood behind glass, still tried to smile for the customers. People kept asking about Frank. "He's resting," she'd say vaguely, not wanting to lie but unwilling to explain the messy truth. Later, Mike posted online, calling Frank his brother, saying he missed him. Danielle read it and nodded. She believed Mike meant it. But Frank had told his son that he always felt like the sidekick, never the star. That stuck with her. Mike had a way with words, a presence that took up space. He was charismatic, driven, relentless. But American Pickers had never been a one-man show. The magic came from the balance, the chemistry between opposites, the unpolished realness of two guys who loved the hunt in different ways. Danielle missed Frank, missed the old version of him before things spiraled. She didn't think Mike ever meant to push him out. But she also knew that feelings could grow bitter when someone feels forgotten. As the show went on, Mike's show now, it was clear that the past wasn't coming back. Frank wasn't coming back. Danielle watched as the familiar white truck rolled into view and then disappeared into the distance, and all she could do was bow her head and quietly honor what had been, taking her along again, but still not him. Danielle returned to the shop, quietly balancing her professional life with a deeply personal sorrow. Rumors swirled online, whispers of betrayal, jealousy, and hidden feuds, but she tuned them out. She knew the truth wasn't so black and white. Mike was hurting too, though. He rarely showed it. Frank's pain was deeper, layered in years of physical illness and emotional wear. The rupture between them had happened, and the show's momentum carried forward like a machine that couldn't stop. Danielle knew there was nothing she could do to rewind time. All she could do was stay present, tend to her business, and wait to see what came next. Eventually, in July 2021, Danielle had enough. She had stayed quiet long enough, choosing silence not as a sign of guilt or complicity, but out of respect. However, the constant barrage of accusations and demands for clarity forced her hand. She shared a selfie with Mike on Instagram, her arm looped around him, both smiling, and captioned it, "Back on the road with my brother and best friend. Always have and always will support him." It was a subtle but firm statement, a line drawn in the sand. But it wasn't an attack on Frank. Danielle still had more to say. In a follow-up post, she opened up, softly, sincerely. She expressed how deeply saddened she was to see Frank go, how she'd watched him struggle for years behind the scenes. It hadn't been about conflict or betrayal. It had been about illness, about real, crippling health issues. Frank's Crohn's disease had wreaked havoc on his body, and he had suffered in silence more often than not. Danielle had witnessed it for over a decade. She kept the gritty details private, refusing to let Frank's pain become fodder for tabloids. She wasn't angry. She wasn't blaming anyone. She was just heartbroken. Heartbroken to watch a friend deteriorate and fade away from something they'd all built together. She posted not to ignite drama, but to offer a sliver of truth, a way to push back against the distorted headlines, the clickbait narratives, and the unsolicited interpretations of her silence. She had been misquoted, her words twisted, her stillness used as ammunition. She was done with that. This wasn't about secrets. It was about protecting dignity. Her decision to speak was born from pain, not provocation. She wanted fans to understand. Yes, something had broken, but not the way they imagined. Danielle never gave it all away. She never had. Years of shared miles, roadside finds, inside jokes, and hotel lobby talks tied her to both men. And in the end, she stayed by Mike's side, not out of favoritism, but because he stayed present. That didn't mean she stopped caring for Frank. Her post wasn't a bombshell. It was a release. A quiet declaration that she had seen it all, felt it all, and had to speak for herself. Afterward, she let the silence return. Fans still asked about Frank, but less often. When they did, she smiled gently and said, "Check out my post." Then she'd quietly turn back to her work. Mike, meanwhile, kept filming, sticking to the path he'd chosen. Danielle supported him from a respectful distance, her loyalty steady even as the past continued to haunt the corners of their world. Frank never responded. He didn't need to. The distance had grown not out of hatred but time, fatigue, and perhaps too many things. Left unsaid. Danielle understood. She'd done her part, she had cleared the air, stated her truth, and tried to put the swirling gossip to rest. She never pretended there wasn't pain. She simply offered what she could and stepped back. After her post in 2021, the dust settled, but never completely. Frank officially departed from American Pickers, and Danielle, caught in the center, remained a witness to the unraveling. Still, she kept dancing, kept the store alive, kept the energy light for the fans. But inside, she knew Frank was not okay. His Crohn's continued to torment him. Despite rumors of his recovery, Danielle knew it wasn't going as well as people hoped. She didn't reach out, not because she didn't care, but because she believed he needed space, peace, and time to heal. Quietly, she hoped for him. Hoped he'd make it through. Mike carried the show, and Danielle kept supporting him in her steady, loyal way. Sometimes she watched him come into the shop, his smile tired but genuine. "We're still picking," he'd say. And she'd nod, grateful he was still standing. The fans didn't ask about Frank as often anymore. It was as though her words had quieted something deep in them too. Haunting tales echoed in the corners of the shop, but Danielle still heard the murmurs, the whispered updates, the quiet heartbreak. Frank was struggling. The hospital visits had become more frequent, each one a reminder that the road he once loved was becoming too difficult to travel. Picking, once a passion, now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by pain and fatigue. Danielle's heart ached. She missed the old Frank, the man who'd once rolled up on his rusty bike, grin wide, eyes bright, acting like a kid who had just discovered treasure. That man was slipping away piece by piece. Then came 2022. It hit. Like a thunderclap. Frank suffered a massive stroke. The news shook everyone. Danielle found out through a crew member. She didn't press for details. She didn't need to. The only thing that mattered was that Frank had been critically hurt. Mike, she heard, had dropped everything the moment he got the call. No hesitation. He rushed to the hospital and sat beside Frank's bed, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the sterile air of the ICU. Danielle heard he brought photos, little artifacts, small objects they'd found together on the road. They weren't just memories. They were anchors to a shared history, proof that beneath all the distance and silence, Mike still cared deeply. Danielle didn't visit. Not because she didn't love Frank, she did, but because they had never been that close, not in the way she and Mike had been. Still, she watched from a distance. She followed the updates quietly, always hoping for the best, praying Frank would pull through. But the stroke had devastated him. His recovery was slow, incomplete. He was never quite the same again. And then, in October 2024, the call came. Frank Fritz had passed away. Danielle could barely breathe when she heard Mike's voice, quiet and tired. He's gone. She didn't know what to say. She didn't need to. Mike told her he had stayed by Frank's side until the very end, that he had been there holding on to the moments and items that had once bonded them so deeply. That was all Danielle needed to know. She didn't post right away. She didn't light up social media with tributes or memories. She sat in the stillness of that loss, her throat tight, remembering Frank's laugh, his odd little comments, his unique lens on the world. Losing Frank felt like losing part of the soul of the show, of their shared story. Fans, still unaware of the whole truth, began speculating again. Accusations reignited, pointing fingers at Mike, claiming fame had come between them. Danielle shook her head, frustrated. She had seen how hard Mike had tried, how much he had carried silently. She had watched him rearrange filming schedules, hold phone conversations with Frank where every word was laced with effort and pain. Frank hadn't been forced out. He had been hurting, plain and simple. He loved what he did, but his body had failed him. Danielle finally decided to speak, not for drama, not for attention, but because people needed to understand. She recounted how, between 2016 and 2018, Frank had been hospitalized 17 times. It was a staggering number, one that the public had never known. Mike had never spoken of it publicly, had never blamed Frank. He had tried. God, he had tried. But there was only so much anyone could do. Danielle didn't sugarcoat anything. She gave the truth space to breathe, raw and unembellished. Frank's decline wasn't the result of tension or fame, but simply the toll of illness and time. Mike, often misrepresented, had never turned his back on his friend. Instead, he showed up when it mattered, bearing the weight of loss quietly. Their story was one of friendship tested by reality, not rivalry. Danielle's voice brought resolution, not drama, and in that simplicity, fans found closure. It wasn't about ratings or headlines. It was about honoring a bond that had shaped a show and remembering the man who helped make it special.